So good evening and welcome to the Zoning Design Review Board for Tuesday, July 9th, 2013. CDRB agendas and staff reports are available at the front door. And for you viewers at home, the agenda is available on the town's website at townofyountville.com. We are being broadcast live on channel 28 via Napa Valley TV, and live web streaming is also available at townofyountville.com. And our meeting will be rebroadcast for all those who miss any of the details this Friday at 10 a.m., so that would be Friday, July 12th. Turn off your cell phones, and when you come up to address us, please state your name for the record, and remember you're talking for everyone at home as well. So, Sandra, shall we start with a roll call?
Member Cook.
Here.
Member James.
Here.
Member Gates.
Gates, here.
Chair Durham.
Here.
Member Scoggins is excused.
Very good. So first item is to adopt the agenda. Any questions or concerns or changes? Very good. Shall someone move to adopt the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. Now, approval of the minutes. Do we need, there are some who were not here in November, there are some who were not here in April, and there are some who were not here in May. What should we?
You should approve them one at a time then.
Excellent. So we shall start with November 13th. With the three of us, do you see any changes, Bob or Jason?
I do not.
Nope.
Great. Do we have an approval?
Move we approve.
And a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. And all approve, all are in favor? Aye. Very good. We shall move on to April 9th. I was here. Bob? Jason, you were both here on April 9th?
I have no comment on the previous agendas.
All right. Any approval of the April 9th agenda?
Moved.
Second.
Excellent. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And look, now we get to all vote on the 14th. Oh, except for me. So any changes to that agenda, minutes?
No.
None.
All right. So move to approve the agenda? The minutes. Thank you. Commissioner Cook, in a second?
Yep.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Well, that was fun. We got to do that. All right. Now, I would call for public comment, but seeing no additional bodies, we shall move on to item 8, presentation of discussion of the use permit amendment and design review for Lavender Inn at 2002 Weber Avenue. And given my proximity to the property, I'll need to recuse myself. And with Vice Chair Scoggins not here, I'm not too sure how you want to proceed.
You would decide amongst yourselves who you'd like to chair
Ooh,
the
I wish I
meeting.
would have known this ahead of time. I could have called him. Excellent. Commissioner Gates will...
May I propose
Oh.
our distinguished colleague Jason to take charge of this discussion, please?
All right.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
Good choice.
Sandra Prey, go ahead with the staff report.
Tonight you have before you a request by Lavender Inn to convert the second floor of the existing barn to a 9th guest suite. And the barn is shown here. It's located at the southeast corner of the property, in that lower right-hand corner on this site plan. This drawing shows the existing layout on the ground floor, and the barn serves as the drive aisle to the parking lot on the property, and both sides of the drive aisle are built out with storage and a laundry room. The second floor, which you see on the left, is just a wide open space that's unconditioned and used for storage. On this slide on the left-hand side, you see how the applicant would like to build out the space. And it would be a one-room guest suite with separate bedroom and living facilities. And the new access stairwell at the top of the slide is at the rear of the structure, and it would provide access. These drawings show the proposed changes to the barn, and it would essentially or generally remain unchanged. However, there are some changes proposed. And let's start with the front elevation. There is an existing hay loft and a hay pulley that will stay on the building, and there are 2 new windows proposed, and they are in kind for existing windows, or at least openings on the property. They have broken windows and would be replaced. The lower left-hand drawing shows the elevation with the most significant changes, and it is the west elevation. You see 2 new dormers, and these would include windows to provide light and some ceiling space within the building. The other changes are to the rear of the parcel, and that's shown in the upper right-hand corner, and it shows the stairwell, the balcony, and a new door that's generally in the location of an existing window, and the siding on the elevations would be retained as well. You can compare the drawings here to the photograph that shows the only change here are replacement windows, the dormers on this elevation, and the new stairwell, balcony, and entry on this elevation. Also proposed as part of the project is to increase the on-site parking supply for this expansion in the use. And Lavender Inn is a 8-room lodging establishment that has 5 on-site parking spaces. And this is the driveway that shows the parking lot, but I don't have a photo of the parking lot. And at the current parking ratio, the inn is underparked for the use, and so the applicant proposes putting 5 perpendicular spaces in this general location on Jefferson to the north of this heritage oak tree. And the proposal is to remove the landscaping that you see, a portion of the Bools Court, which is just beyond the landscaping, and to create these pull-in spaces. They mostly be located on the property for approximately 16 feet, but a portion would overhang the right-of-way and would overhang the property where we currently have on-street parking. And so with the addition of the 5 on-site parking stalls, we will have 10 parking spaces on the property, which is just 1 short of the minimum parking requirement, and it should significantly improve the parking situation in the neighborhood and decrease the inn's burden on surrounding streets. I have a few more photos here to show you, and this is from the corner. So now I'll go over the issues with regards to the property and how the applicant has responded and staff's position on those items. However, before moving forward, I do want to mention that this property is in the Old Town Historic Zoning District, and that's a residential district, and since this is a commercial use, it is designated a retained use, and retained uses are permitted to remain and continue business. They're even permitted to expand where there are no impacts to surrounding properties. So that's one thing to consider. Floor area ratio is the first item that I will mention, and the existing inn and the 3 detached lodging structures on the property have an existing FAR of 0.249, and that's just about at the maximum 25% FAR. And the reason for the increase in FAR is because the barn structure, both the first floor that serves as a drive aisle and the second floor that's used for storage, is considered an FAR exemption, and it hasn't been counted toward the FAR. When we consider it, in this case, converting to a use area, the FAR will be increased to 0.296. This increase in FAR, however, is unique to this property in the fact that it's using existing space that already exists. The barn already exists in its current location, and these changes to the interior should have very little impact on the structure itself other than the 2 new dormer windows. But those do not increase the FAR, nor does the stairwell and balcony at the rear. As I already mentioned, the parking reconfiguration is part of what the applicant is seeking approval for. And because this improves the parking situation in the neighborhood, and the parcel really doesn't have any other opportunity to provide that one space that they're short, staff views this as a positive. The heritage oak on the corner was a concern in the early stages of this project, and we had the applicant work with the town arborist to develop a parking area that would not impact the tree or would minimally impact the tree, and the applicant has responded. Originally, they proposed parking spaces within 4 feet of the trunk. They're now proposing parking 20 feet from the trunk, and they'll be using a geogrid and textile treatment that will minimize the compaction of the roots and allow aeration. So staff is satisfied with the treatments for the heritage oak. The last item to mention is the barn and its historic designation. This site is listed on the National Register, and that includes the John Lee Weber House, which is the structure at the corner, and it serves as some of the guest rooms. The other is this barn, and because it's listed on the National Register and it is considered a historic resource, we must evaluate any modifications to it under CEQA, and a determination must be made that there will be no adverse impacts to the historic structure. The applicant has worked with a consultant that provided a report concluding that the proposed changes will not impact the historic structure. Since we received that report, we've also communicated with Napa Valley Landmarks and the State Historic Preservation Office regarding impacts, and the applicant submitted a response with the same conclusion that these are minor changes that are to the Secretary of Interior standards. So this is before you tonight for design review in an advisory capacity, and we will take your recommendation on to the Town Council. Staff is recommending that you make a motion to approve the project, and we'd ask that you also look at the proposed conditions of approval, and if there is a consensus to add those or make any modifications, we'll forward those as well. That's the end of my report, but the applicant and the historic consultant are both here tonight.
All right, thank you, Sandra. Always well put. Before we hear from the applicant, are there questions of staff?
None for me, thank you.
I have a question of Sandra. On the picture looking north from Weber, where it went up the street, like from the oak tree,
Oh, going on.
photograph.
I'm going back that way.
Yeah, one more. That
Here we
one.
go.
Can you, I couldn't figure out by visiting the site, can you indicate to what point the cars will stick out?
I think the white sedan you see in the photo is probably a good example of a potential area of how far they'll back out, perhaps not that
But
far.
when they're parked,
Mhm.
they'll stick, I mean, that seems like a hazard. Okay.
We have had the Public Works Department look at the proposal, and they do not have major issues with it. It's something that they can work with. It is definitely more unusual. However, it's something that we are open to exploring for this property that is retained use and is significantly built out, and that really is underparked. So it's working with the situation, the conditions that we have.
Okay. Thank you.
Sandra, one question and perhaps one comment before we hear from the applicant. Do I
So perhaps not that far.
correctly see the proposed conditions of approval wholly incorporate the arborist's recommendation?
I didn't quite hear that.
Do I correctly see that the proposed conditions of approval wholly incorporate the arborist recommendation?
They do.
Great. And then this might be a quibble, but the last sentence of page 4 of the staff report, which reads, "No new floor areas proposed," I would respectfully suggest that be rephrased, since floor area is a defined phrase in our ordinance, and stick with the building envelopes not growing and whatnot. I think it introduces a little ambiguity.
That's a good point.
Floor area, if it doesn't increase, the FAR can't increase unless the property's getting smaller. So that was my only question, thank you. We would love to hear from the applicant.
Good evening, my name is George Ash, I'm the architect for the project. I'd like to say for the record that Sandra's staff report is one of the best ones that I've been privileged to receive in almost 30 years of doing this in many jurisdictions all over the state. And I just want to get that on record.
Good.
Very thorough and very well written report. I'd also like to say that I was the original architect back when the lab was developed, and did the 3 additional buildings and the remodel of the main house. And so I'm familiar with the background, so I'm not just coming into this for this particular project. And back when we did that, back in, I think it was 1999 or 2000, I'm a little hasty on the dates, it was over 13 years ago. The barn was in very bad shape when we started the project. And during the process of doing the 3 buildings and remodeling the main house, we did some retrofitting to the barn to shore it up, reframe the floor because it was falling down. Can I point? I don't know, I guess I'm. So the floor was, it was very structurally unsound. We were fearful of cars driving through here. So we went in and structurally re-supported the floor, new floor joists and beams and posts and some footings. The roof was also very much sagging and just about ready to cave in. And so we went in and reframed from the inside underneath it, cistered on new rafters throughout the whole roof to shore that up. And the corrugated roof that was put on at that time to match the 3 buildings that were built. And during the process of kind of putting a Band-Aid on the barn, if you will, bringing it up, you know, to a little more safety, we did the additions to the underneath of the storage of the laundry facility. So that was the work that was done about 12 or 13 years ago. We didn't really touch any of the openings or the windows or so forth with the barn siding. That's all been there for the last however many years. So now it's time for another fix-up. We felt this was a good time to get the barn in top shape and get it back up to snuff and get it retrofitted. At the same time, benefiting the end and proposing the parking. We really feel it's a win-win situation for everybody. If you want to go back to that tree picture real quick, I'll just point out the one looking down.
Oh.
Yeah. The cars are going to maybe stick out to here. Not even
That's
to
what
the
it looks
point where
like.
the parallel parking takes place now. Okay, and the only thing I'd like to add to that is that we're showing the depth of the parking space is 20 feet. And this day and age with everyone's compact cars, there's a compact parking space that can be 16 feet. I don't know if the town allows compact spaces. In Monterey, we allow compact spaces. And so I think 90% of the time when people are parking there, they're not going to stick out at all. They're going to fit within a compact parking space. I think it's going to be very rare that anyone actually extends into the street, but that was why we reasoned that. And it kept the parking far enough away from the buildings that we could have a really nice landscape buffer between the parking and the buildings. So that was the theory behind that. Other than that, like I said, the staff report, I think, clearly explains everything, and Mr. Bergstein is here, the consultant for the historian, if you have any questions of him. Otherwise, I think I'll just keep it short and I'll answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Are there questions of the architect or the historic consultant?
No, no question.
Mr. Ash, can you tell us what might happen to the lower level of the barn during the upgrade? Will the workers there have more enhanced facilities, better facilities in any way, or will it just kind of stay the same while the upstairs is being upgraded? Better laundry facilities perhaps, or rec room, locker room for the workers or something like that?
We're not proposing any work on the lower levels.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, I was just kind of curious. I walked up there and walked through there today and looked like if you're going to spiff up everything, you might just,
I'll definitely make a note of that and put that,
Just
because
for-
the other side where there's that long storage room, there could be a potential there for some lockers and so forth. I think they have,
I'm not proposing it, I'm just saying.
they have some
While
locker.
you're doing one thing, you might as well do it all.
Right, I agree. And so yes, I will push for anything that needs to be upgraded now, we'll
Say
do it.
do it now
Now's the
rather
time
than
to
come
do it.
back to us.
Yes, exactly, good point.
That's only my
Okay.
only comment.
Mrs. Cook, questions for the applicant?
I guess that one would be, was there any consideration to doing those parking spots on a diagonal instead of straight in?
Yes, I actually did look at that, and when you go on the diagonal, it takes more room to park, and perpendicular is the most efficient way to do that. And like I said, I forgot to mention, and Sandra did, that originally I had proposed more towards the tree. And when we work with the arborist, and so now he's saying, hey, stay 20 feet away from the tree and do this. So that pretty much limits the space that we have for the parking, and I think the perpendicular is the only way to get those spaces on there.
So if you did 4, you could fit them diagonally instead of 5, probably?
It may be 3,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And it would be harder, obviously, if you're coming this way to get into those spaces. If you were coming down the
The
street
other
this way to try
direction,
to
Yeah,
turn in.
sure.
yeah.
Okay. I'm finished.
I do have one question.
Okay.
I think you both might touch on it. The dormers is, so I think the architectural question is, can you achieve sufficient natural light without those?
Well, the situation up in the second floor of the barn is that there's a wall about this tall, and then the roof starts up, so the headroom is minimal. And that's why on the other side, you see that we have pretty much storage along that side in order to get out far enough to where there's headroom. So what the dormer affords us is to allow us to use a little bit more of that space for a couple of sitting areas and a chair, and to help bring some vertical light in to the space. And it makes it more comfortable. The psychic space is better. It creates a little interest inside, and it gives us a little more headroom for usability. The only way we could not have the dormers would be to put skylights on the roof. And I guess there's some operable skylights that we may be able to use. I think Velux makes some, but there's dormers on the main house, and I thought that tied in nicely with the dormers on the main house. So that's the main function of the dormers, is that it actually makes the space much more usable and desirable.
I agree, and thank you. I think it's a good feature, but of the historic items, that seemed to me to be the one that leapt out, possibly contentious. So I'm asking these questions and hope you'll speak to it as well to
Okay.
get a little further discussion on the record, as you've just done.
Okay,
So thank you.
I'll turn it over to Mr. Bergstein.
Hello, everybody. Seth Bergstein, principal and owner of Past Consultants. Yeah, and I kind of know the building like the back of my hand, so any questions I'd be welcome to answer.
I would like you to just revisit your response to the, some reservations Landmarks had about the dormers, and
Okay.
help us make it easy to recommend that they stay in the project, both architecturally and usability without compromising the historic integrity.
Well, I guess the way I would respond to that, and if you have, I have the letters printed in front of me, if there's a specific page or something you want to refer to.
Page 2,
Okay.
tailing into page 3.
Okay. I think, as with all these adaptive reuse projects, and we're talking about rehabilitation here, we need to look at how the building evolved. And we're dealing with a building where you have a gable roof form, gable roof massing with some cornice returns, which is where your fascia boards come in underneath horizontal. And it's really more of a carriage house than a barn. It was where Mr. Weber stored his Surrey, and he probably had an animal on one side and probably stored the vehicle on the other side, flanking the pass-through. So we looked at what are the primary character-defining features of the building, and what changed in the 90s when the building was rehabilitated at that time. And you have, especially if you're standing within the within the loft itself, you'll see almost, just given the condition of the building at the time, most of the original structure is not there anymore. And if it's there, it's been sistered. And then we have the corrugated metal roof, which is pretty evident right there in that photograph as a replacement. So when you look at the standards, you need to ask yourself, how much historic fabric are we removing? How much historic fabric are we impacting? And can we, if you look at standards 9 and 10, could we reverse the construction process? I mean, if you wanted to do a forensic restoration of the building, how would you do it 10 years from now if that's something the town wanted to do? So reversibility is what you're going after when you're looking to satisfy those last two standards. And with a replaced roof and a predominantly replaced superstructure in there, we're not impacting historic fabric. We're impacting fabric that's been replaced. Is it creating a change in the visual nature of the building? It is, but it's not something that is necessarily permanent. So if you were removing skylight, if you're going to poke a hole in and do a skylight, you're essentially probably going to remove as much fabric to put a skylight in as you are a dormer. So the question becomes, how does the board feel about a visual impact? But as far as historicity is concerned, we're looking at the entire site. We're looking at the integrity of the entire site. And the primary structure on the site is the house itself. The carriage house or the lavender barn would be considered the secondary structure. So we're impacting a secondary structure, so you're not going to impact National Register status because you're not impacting enough of the integrity of the entire site. The site's changed, frankly, pretty dramatically. And the carriage house itself has changed pretty dramatically. So you're impacting areas of the building that are already changed. So from an analysis of the standards, we're not impacting anything in addition to what was done previously. And if you look at how we look at elevations through the standards, we're considering the south-facing elevation facing Weber Ave as the primary elevation, and we're restoring as much of that as we possibly can. And we're not impacting the actual form and massing of the building. So that would be my kind of brief response.
Good.
Any further questions of the applicant?
No, that was sort of my concern too, the Napa Valley Landmarks comment regarding the dormers and that it significantly changed the character from a barn to a building with dormers. But in looking at historic buildings around Napa Valley this weekend, there are a lot that have been upgraded for modern uses, and even though they sort of changed their character, they end up being redone in a beautiful way that keeps a building and repurposes it, and I feel it can work.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So our next action is to discuss it, and while we're not taking any binding or formal action tonight, we want to pretend as though we are and have a motion and a vote so that there is sort of one easily graspable action for the council to see. That doesn't preclude us from making some comments. So with that said, who'd like to begin with summarizing their position before we entertain a motion?
I'll
Mr.
try.
Gates.
I'll try. I think it's a great project. Looks like this whole building's gonna fall down if we don't do something sometime soon. And I went down there today and looked at it all over the place, and this was a January photo, and you would be able to see the dormers easily. Today, you wouldn't be able to see them whatsoever because of the foliage. I think it's just, a compliment to the entrepreneurs and people who are running the property. It's a beautiful property. I don't think they do anything halfway. I'm sure it's going to be excellent and outstanding, and we all like old buildings, but this is a resource for the entrepreneurs who run the property and for the town, because it will generate cash flow, it will generate goodwill and word of mouth of being able to stay in this historic property with a lovely suite. And generally, since this is my last meeting of my term, I'll just continue to support the entrepreneurs and the capitalists and those who take risks and put their money up front to make the town what it is. And I think it's a fabulous project, and I thank you both.
Mrs. Cook?
I agree. I think they've done a nice job, and I accept the changes that they're putting forth. I think they're being presented in a very historically respectful way.
I came here tonight ambivalent. As Holder said about Rich, neutral leaning favorable. One thing we've rarely, if ever, made except a de minimis exception to is FAR. It's probably the single most fundamental rule we have in the town. I think so I'm reluctant to support an FAR exception, acknowledging that there's no increase in the building envelope. However, I think one thing is very telling, and that's that there are no neighbors here. I do think really the choice is quite stark. We can reduce the parking impact to the surrounding, virtually entirely residential neighborhood except across the street, and in exchange have the barn turned into a room. Now, of course, there's nothing preventing the applicant from redoing the parking regardless of the structure, but it wouldn't make any sense, and we have no reason or cause to compel the applicant to do that. So I go to some length because I think in this limited case, which is probably going to be a rare exception in town of a registered historic landmark, no new building area, I'm prepared to entertain, support rather, a motion that approves the project, and I'm satisfied the dormers are a good addition to the project. So with that said, it sounds like we are ready for a motion.
We are.
Would someone care to make it?
Not good at that yet.
I'd like to propose we accept the project as proposed, including the arborist comments and observations, assuming that's no problem.
I forgot to mention we're fine, totally fine with all the conditions.
Otherwise, I propose that we approve the project as proposed.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There are none opposed. Best wishes. Thank you. Good night.
Good luck on your project.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
We will welcome Chair Durham back.
Thank you. So let's move on to 8.2, Draft Property Maintenance Ordinance. Sandra?
So we are presenting a draft property maintenance ordinance for your consideration and discussion tonight. What this ordinance does is create a single ordinance that addresses all property maintenance issues, hopefully, although there's probably room for some changes still. The staff report notes how we have different chapters in the Yountville Municipal Code for weed and rubbish abatement, storing and repairing of vehicles, and nuisances in general. But these are in different locations, and they're not really comprehensive as to all property maintenance issues that may occur. Of course, the nuisance chapter tries to go about it as a catch-all and to catch anything that isn't
Mr.
standard.
Chair, Sandra, may I interrupt? I don't seem to, and I don't think Mr. Gates does either, have a staff report for this item. Is there something we should be reading
I
along?
had it, but I lost it.
Really?
Now I think I've got it.
There you
Yes,
go.
I've got it.
It is within.
It's the one with this part on the back.
Wow.
Time out.
That's it.
Someone just slipped it under here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, okay. Okay.
My bad.
Frank, go ahead.
So we have found that the existing code sections were they've worked well in allowing us to go after properties that are doing the more significant things, like abandoning appliances and different things that obviously aren't appropriate for yards, for the accumulation of trash, a little less frequently the ones on weed and rubbish abatement, except where they're the more obvious case of overgrown weeds on a vacant lot. So what we're proposing is an ordinance that creates 2 separate sections for the property maintenance conditions and then one for the vehicle storage conditions. And I'll just go through some of these, but on the first page we'd be looking at 8.10.030B, and 1 and 2 are already part of the code. It's about garbage and trash and stagnant water. The third one is new, and it's on garbage recycling and green waste containers. And this is really the result of some complaints we've had recently about the location that some neighbors store their bins, where they're visible from the street and where they leave them out for days on end, maybe up to a week. So we are proposing a new section that your bins can only be placed out in front of your property for the term of collection, and we've defined that as 7 a.m. the morning before, so on Sunday, until 7 p.m. On the day following collection, which would be Tuesday. And what we're trying to do is to find a reasonable balance here to allow homeowners to put their bins out and bring them in without impacting their neighbors, understanding that maybe someone will get home after work on 5 on one night and not bring it in, and also realizing we have many second homeowners that are probably the ones, well, no, they're not the ones who leave them out the most, but we have the second homeowner to work with. Number 5 on fences and walls is a new condition to deal with some instances of falling down walls and fences that we've seen. I think number 6 is pretty straightforward. It identifies all the types of items you would not want to see your neighbors stored in their yard, and this is very objective and should be easy to enforce. I'd say 7 is a little more difficult because we're talking about vegetation, and we don't want to create a situation where every weed or every minor situation is a violation. So some of the ways we've tried to define it are a condition that would have a tendency to depreciate the appearance of property values. Well, that's a hard value to understand when you've reached a violation. So this one is harder for us. We've also, now moving on to the vehicle storage conditions, we've expanded upon these and put them in one location, so they're really easier to identify when a violation has occurred. Our current code adopts the county ordinance, and the county ordinance is not well suited for Yountville because it is mainly geared at vehicles that are left and abandoned on county roadways rather than private property. And this tries to make it more specific to Yountville, and identifying that abandoned and inoperable vehicles are not allowed, and then identifying the different parking locations that are permitted. I would call your attention to C, which talks about parking on a driveway which is normally allowed, but it would not be allowed under this ordinance where it unreasonably prevents the routine and useful access to a garage parking space. And we probably see that a lot in town where people permanently store a vehicle in front of a driveway so you simply can't get to it. The idea, you don't have to use your garage, but it needs to be reasonably accessible. So whether that's a standard you'd want to include. We've also included this because we've noticed that some vehicles in town, those that aren't moved, may have flat tires, and so it can't be moved, and so that would allow us to go after that type of situation. I mentioned in the staff report that we really tend to go after the bad cases, and those are ones where we have a neighbor complaint, and so we've pursued them in that manner. And the result is we haven't cleaned up every property in town. There are there are several. And if we were to put a new ordinance into effect, there should be discussion about whether we would take a very active role in pursuing every property with each violation to clean the town up to a new standard, or whether it's okay for those to exist where there are no complaints and where they've been maybe a long-term situation. I'd also mention that this ordinance would establish a minimum property standard because that's all the town wants to go after. We don't want to go after more of a homeowners association type level of maintenance that you need. So we've tried to keep it to that level, but we seek your input on that. With that said, many of our properties are governed by homeowners associations in town. We have the Vista Homeowners Association, which is between Fennell and Forester. We have, I cannot think of it, the one on Oak Circle is also. Vintage, right, we have a homeowner there here tonight. So those would be held to a higher standard, just simply by the Homeowners Association. The different condo associations, I can think of two others, all the names are escaping me right now. And then the mobile home parks too. So that leaves, Washington Park, Mulberry, Old Town. And so I guess that's what this ordinance would be geared at trying to resolve. So anyway, I'll turn it over to all of you.
Well, I'm champing at the bit.
I'm sure you are, being this is the first you're seeing of this. So please go ahead with your questions.
It's really comments. While the general thrust I support, some of you have been to my home. I'm a bit nuts about cleanliness and order, and I like that. But let me run through the things that I think in the wrong hands are a terrible, terrible tool that can be turned to me. So I'll start with B.3. I frequently do yard work on Saturday and will schlep my yard waste cans out to the street, and they'll be out there from Saturday afternoon till Monday. So I think that period is far too thin. I have proudly displayed in my front yard, 6.C, an inoperable hay rake that belonged to my grandfather that was used to mow the hayfield where Vista Condominiums is. That's a discarded and inoperable piece of machinery because all the iron wheels are rusted solid. But what if my neighbor came to you and said, this is in violation of the ordinance? Similarly, I have a 19th century corn sheller that was used to make the grain for the mules that pulled the hay rake sitting on my front porch in my front yard. Is that a piece of machinery that's been discarded? I know I'm making examples that might seem to be too broad, but I find this is a really overreach. Storage of abandoned, inoperative, wrecked vehicles. I think that needs to be limited to where they're visible from the public right-of-way. If there's a person who has a large backyard and has got a 6-foot fence, and I think of my good friend who he and his son spent 8 months rebuilding a 1954 Ford. And it was inoperable for a long time. It's a gorgeous vehicle running now. To me, this prevents someone from doing that. Now, should they be doing it in their front yard? Probably not. But I don't find anything in 8.10.40 that says it's only applying to areas that are visible from the public right-of-way. Similarly, this is an old saw for me, but 8.10.40C, parking where such parking unreasonably prevents routine access, etc. You're right. We don't require people to use their garages. My family does. There's always room for both vehicles in my garage, but we also have more than 2 vehicles in the family. So why does it matter that someone can't get to their garage that's piled high of boxes? To me, it's not achieving anything. If you can't say you have to keep your garage itself usable, who cares if somebody's always parking in front of their garage? They can't get in their garage. You have to have access to the thing you can't use. Lastly, the extended parking. Again, this appears to be applying to private property.
That's a correction I would make.
So if I go on vacation and my son, for example, his vehicle is parked in our driveway and their vehicle's in the garage, he's in violation, or I'm in violation for leaving a vehicle on a long holiday weekend.
I understand your point. I mentioned that that should be on the public right-of-way, and that was my errand. in
Okay, I'm
drafting
sorry, I
this,
didn't catch that.
so.
That's
Well,
F.
that's because it's not
That's
clear.
F. That's F.
Lastly, I'm
Yeah.
going to back up and respectfully suggest that 7.b, so that's part of 8.10.30, I think it's only referring to landscaping that's overgrown, dead, decayed, disease, or hazardous vegetation, trees, landscaping, but I think as written, it could just seem to refer to landscaping that is likely to harbor rodents, vermin, or other vectors. So I have a border of ivy and star jasmine on two sides of my home. Again, very personalizing it. I'm quite sure there are critters living in there. I'm also quite sure my neighbors like it, that I've got all my drainage is organic and stays on the site. So please clarify that what you're talking about is landscaping that's dead or so sorry for my vigor, but as you see, I feel strongly about some of
Speaking of
these.
plans, very good.
Pardon?
No, that was good.
Other than
Commissioner
that, I support the thrust of that, you know, dilapidated pieces of property should require a certain level of upkeep.
So is it an issue in Yountville?
Yes,
It is.
yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Gates?
Is it a solvable issue, I guess is the question. I thoroughly support all these ideas. I'd hate to be the poor guy that has to go out and try to enforce it, but you're also, I think, opening ourselves up to some class struggle issues and quality of life issues and so on regarding lots of vehicles parked on the parcel, and there's a few around. There are not very many, but there are a few. I wouldn't necessarily want to be the one to have to go up and talk to them about it. But I applaud your efforts and would support them.
Commissioner Cook?
Oh, boy. I agree. I like the idea of putting them all under one umbrella, and I think it is an important path that we start to work on for the cases that seem very much in violation. Starting with the very first paragraph, though, of .010, purpose. When it gets to the sentence, these regulations address conditions that degrade the appearance of property and detract from the quality of life for residents, business operations, and visitors to town. I think I would want to strike that from the different places it appears, because degrading the appearance is too wide, too open, too opinionated, too us versus them, too unaccepting of different styles versus trying to set a goal of eliminating hazards and public nuisances. To me, those kind of are beyond what I would like to see it doing. I agree with the part about that the receptacles should not be stored in the front yard, but I also agree with Jason's comment that that period that they can be out is a bit too short because of the weekend thing and the Monday pickup. So I wouldn't want to tie it down that tightly. Again, 7C under .30 is another one of the depreciation of appearance type things I would prefer to not see in there. I agree with the useful access to required garage parking, since we do allow people to build in their garages. Their driveways are the only place they have to park, and it would be in front of a garage. So to me, that doesn't seem quite right. I agree that people should not be able to park on their lawns and their side yards. Is there anything that prevents property owners that wish to do that from simply paving their front yards? I've seen that happen. Said, fine, you don't want me to park on the lawn, I'll just pave my lawn.
No, that would be a design review issue. So it should be looked at before that's done.
I agree with the intent because I think it has a purpose and I think it has a useful purpose. I'm not sure how far we have to go in defining exactly what it is. And is it possible to write it in a more general way of creating a fire hazard, harboring vermin, injurious to public health and safety and welfare? I'm not sure. I'm just kind of speaking.
So is it an issue?
I think so, here and there. I think there's room to have that in the code. It needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I agree with what everybody has said. I think 81040C is my favorite one because if we require a garage that we are allowed to put a dining room in, then where will they put their car? So we need to be careful there's no conflict there. And I've said that many times before. But also, it's interesting to me that you included the Yountville Sun article because I think all of us at this table have a different definition of all these things as well. And I think specifically of a property in this town whose owners have probably given back more than they've taken. And it's very interesting to me as I think about a couple of properties, but one in particular, to one neighbor who gets cited, yet this one doesn't because of their involvement with the community. We've created a very, very difficult situation as well. You know, the definition of what is all these items in here, so. But I do agree with what everybody has said at this table, so. And I appreciate you putting it all into one area and making it a lot easier and understandable.
Without personally knowing who the person is or where they live that we've mentioned vaguely, just riding my bicycle around the town, you know, there's some definite places that I would be afraid to go onto the property for stepping on something, tripping over something, being bitten by something. And I think without knowing who the owners are, to some degree that needs to be addressed.
Oh, I
It
agree.
doesn't have to look like houses in Heritage Estates or Washington Park, but I think there are things that need to be addressed.
I agree. I just, we need to make sure it's across the board then.
Yes, I agree. And that was one other question is, will this still just be complaint-driven, or will the town choose to start enforcing it unilaterally? I think that would be important.
Good question.
Not fun.
Well, we do have a small department, and when we look at all the issues that are going on out there, it does make it hard, especially to increase the potential violations with a code like this. We're creating an enforcement issue.
But can there be levels of, I mean, everybody knows where those properties are, you know, because it's a small town. So they could be addressed. Okay, let's start with rubbish, you know? Let's start with old appliances. Without saying,
Definitely
plant a
possible.
lawn, mow your water, build a fence, all that kind of stuff. I think that would be important.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I've shot my bolt.
I think you'll come up with something. All right, let's move on to item 9, staff and board reports. Sandra? Bob?
You don't have anything to add, Deanne?
No.
I'm concerned you took out the line item of commissioner discussion. Wasn't there? Or am I just thinking and we just naturally assumed we could chat?
That's staff and
at
board
the end?
reports.
Very good, very good.
So if you have anything to add?
Any applications?
Any applications for the
Yes, we do.
vacant?
Just FYI, the Napa Valley Bike Tours has put an application in for the medical office adjacent to Ranch Market
Oh,
to relocate there
Okay.
from where they are. But Washington Square. Let's see, the church, Yountville Community Church, has applied for a concept, or is going to do a concept review before the town council on the 16th for a proposal to use the single-family dwelling at the corner of Weber and adjacent to them, Weber and Yacht. And they would like to incorporate that single-family dwelling into the church use and move their administrative offices into that building. They want to convert the garage to conditioned space and use the garage in the existing house, which totals about 1,500 square feet for the administrative offices, and then that will free up the annex that's on the north side of the church for the youth programs that don't have a dedicated space in the church right now.
So that's a concept, you called it a concept review?
Yes, they're going to the council to get the council's reaction and comments to that proposal, and then they would, depending on what they hear, I would expect they would submit a formal application which begins the hearing process, the public hearing process. The concept is not a public hearing, and there's no action taken by the council. Usually after the concept, there's like 5 steps in the formal master development plan process. Concept, preliminary, which is in 2 steps, one before the ZDRB, one before the council, and then final, same thing, one before the ZDRB, one before the council. 5 meetings. This is a very straightforward application, and as has been the practice in those types of applications and very complete applications, the council will probably compress final and preliminary into one meeting. It will come to the ZDRB prior to going to council, and you'll do your review and recommendations to council.
Very good. And Bob, you mentioned that the bike tours wants to move over here, and then the other 2 businesses are leaving Washington Park as well?
Washington, Square?
Washington Square, sorry. Thank
I was
you.
mixed up all the time.
Thank you, sorry.
The toy,
Mhm.
Napa Valley Toy Company, and
Vineyard Dog?
Vineyard Dog are both, have decided to not continue there.
Okay. All right.
We have 2 vacancies? Is that right, this group?
1. Oh, I've reapplied.
Excellent. Any other applications?
There's 2.
2.
I don't know the applicants' names, but we do have 2. So 3 for the 2 positions.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I'd like to just make assuming we're closing out here.
Yeah, please.
This is my
Please,
last
Bob.
meeting, and it's been an interesting 3 years, and I think over the 3 years, we've done a lot of work. We've approved a lot of projects. A lot of things have been built, and we've been polishing our little nugget here. And I do want to compliment Jason on excellent leadership the time I was here. I learned a lot from you. I appreciate that. And our other colleagues who are not here, Rob Anglin and Rob Morgan, were asked penetrating questions that were things I never thought to ask. And Sandra and Bob really kind of made this job easy. I learned a lot, and I really learned a lot about how much I appreciate this town every day. And I just want to thank everybody for the time I've spent here. And I won't be here, but I'm going to continue to support the polishing of the nugget in any way possible. So thanks to everybody. It was interesting.
Pleasure
Thank you for your
serving with you,
contribution.
Bob.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, we'll end on that high note
Thank you.
then, Bob. Thank you.
And I am standing around.
Good. So we'll make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Excellent. And a second?
Second.
All right. So we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.